"Filthy heathen!" Edgar Fulton roared, storming toward Wovoka's oak-shaded camp with his militia's boots kicking up dust. Wovoka shielded Awee as she clung to her painted stones, her eyes wide with terror, but Fulton's shove sent her sprawling, igniting Wovoka's rage. A flash of his knife grazed Fulton's arm, and in that split second shouts of "Arrest him!" erupted, chaining Wovoka to a choice. Flee with Awee into the unforgiving desert or surrender to save her from their wrath. Wovoka, a 30-year-old Paiute basket weaver and storyteller, carries the weight of his people's pride in 1895 Nevada, where scorn from white settlers shadows his every step. Living with his fragile 19-year-old sister Awee, whose mind bears scars from boarding school abuse, he fights to keep her safe while scraping coins for her medicine. His heart aches for Sarah, a kind white aid worker, but their love is a forbidden spark in a world divided by hate, forcing Wovoka to balance duty to his sister with a longing for a life beyond the pain of loss and prejudice. The sun had barely set when Sheriff Walton's boots crunched toward Wovoka's camp, his badge glinting with menace. "You're under arrest, Paiute," Walton barked, slapping a crumpled warrant against his palm, accusing Wovoka of assaulting Fulton. Wovoka's heart pounded as he stood before Awee, her trembling hands clutching a painted stone. Walton's eyes narrowed, threatening to drag Awee to the jail if Wovoka resisted, his voice dripping with contempt for troublemaking natives. Wovoka glanced at the few coins hidden in a basket, his mind racing with worry about Awee's medicine, her fragile health teetering on the edge. He remembered his father's words, whispered long ago under this very oak, "Family is your strength." Clenching his fists, Wovoka resolved to flee with Awee before dawn, his stomach twisting with fear of the desert's dangers. He tucked a half-finished basket under his arm, hoping to sell it for a few cents, his eyes burning with defiance as Walton turned away, leaving the threat of capture hanging like smoke. Awee's soft whimpers filled the dim camp as she huddled by the oak, her fingers tracing the rough bark as if it could anchor her. Wovoka knelt beside her, weaving a Paiute tale of a brave girl who outwitted a storm, his voice steady to calm her racing heart. He noticed a bruise blooming on her wrist from Fulton's shove, his chest tightening with guilt for not shielding her sooner. Rummaging through a worn sack, Wovoka found only a pinch of sage for her nerves, cursing the empty medicine pouch. A neighbor's urgent whisper broke the night. "Militia's searching nearby." Wovoka's pulse quickened as he pulled Awee behind a stack of baskets, her shallow breaths hot against his arm. "We'll be safe soon," he promised, though doubt gnawed at him, the memory of Fulton's cruel words echoing. As he stroked her hair, Wovoka's resolve hardened, vowing to keep her from harm, even if it meant leaving everything behind, his heart heavy with the weight of his failure to protect her today. Under a sliver of moonlight, Wovoka slipped through the scrub to Sarah's small cabin, his shadow darting like a hunted deer. Sarah opened the door, her face pale with worry, and asked, "What happened with Fulton?" Wovoka's voice cracked as he recounted Fulton's insults and Awee's fall, his fists clenching at the memory. Sarah's eyes softened, but fear flickered as she urged him to hide with Awee in the desert, her hands trembling as she packed bread and dried fruit. Wovoka's heart ached to tell her he loved her, but the words stuck, choked by the divide between their worlds. Sarah pressed a cloth bag into his hands, promising to ask the town doctor about Awee's medicine. As he turned to leave, her whispered, "Be careful," warmed his chest, though he sensed her torn loyalty to her own people. Wovoka melted back into the night, the weight of her kindness mingling with his fear of what lay ahead. Back at the camp, Wovoka moved swiftly, gathering only what they could carry, a blanket, a water skin, and Awee's cherished painted stones. He tucked her drawings into a woven bag, knowing they were her tether to hope, his fingers lingering on a sketch of their parents. In his mind, he traced the path to the Paiute sacred lands, a place of refuge his father had described, though the way was treacherous. Wovoka tied a small knife to his belt, its cold steel a grim comfort against the militia's guns. Awee's quiet sobs broke his focus. She clung to the oak, begging to stay where their family's spirits lingered. "We'll come back," Wovoka lied, his throat tight, hating the fear in her eyes. He knelt by the tree, whispering a prayer to their ancestors for guidance, the cool bark grounding his resolve. With Awee's hand in his, he led her into the dark, the camp fading behind them, each step heavy with the unknown. Before they could leave the village, Tse, the grizzled Paiute elder, blocked their path, his eyes sharp with disapproval. "Running shames us all," he growled, warning that Wovoka's flight would brand the tribe as cowards. Murmurs rose from nearby huts, neighbors whispering that Wovoka had stirred trouble with the whites. Wovoka's jaw tightened, but he pleaded, explaining Fulton's attack on Awee, his voice shaking with urgency. Awee gripped his hand, her wide eyes darting to Tse, fearing he'd force them to stay. Wovoka swore he'd prove his honor, but Tse's silence cut deeper than words, leaving him isolated. As they turned away, Wovoka felt the sting of betrayal, the tribe's doubt like a stone in his chest. He squeezed Awee's hand, vowing to protect her alone if he must, his steps quickening toward the desert's edge, the weight of their judgment trailing behind. The desert stretched endlessly before Wovoka and Awee, its sand silver under a waning moon. Awee stumbled, her voice small as she asked if the oak would miss them, her words piercing Wovoka's heart. He spun a story of their ancestors dancing under these stars, his voice a lifeline to keep her fear at bay. A distant howl of dogs sent a chill through him. The militia was closer than he'd hoped. Wovoka spotted a narrow crevice in a rocky outcrop and guided Awee inside, her thin frame shaking against him. She clutched her stones, muttering about the boarding school's cold walls, and Wovoka's chest ached with her pain. He checked their water skin, finding it half empty, his throat dry with worry about the days ahead. Whispering a prayer to the spirits, Wovoka held Awee close, their shared warmth a fragile shield against the vast, unforgiving night. By morning, Awee's forehead burned under Wovoka's touch, her fever rising like a cruel sun. He dabbed her face with a damp cloth, his hands trembling as she moaned, her eyes unfocused. Scouring the sparse desert for herbs, Wovoka found only brittle sage, useless against her worsening state, his frustration boiling into despair. Awee's weak voice called for their parents, each word a dagger in his heart, reminding him of their deaths at the militia's hands. He sat beside her, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep, his mind screaming with fear of losing her. The memory of her near death at the boarding school flooded back, sharpening his resolve to find help. Wovoka decided to head toward a spring near the sacred lands, praying it still flowed. He lifted Awee, her weight light but crushing, and carried her forward, each step a battle against his breaking heart. Sheriff Walton rallied his militia at dawn, their horses snorting as Gideon, Fulton's ruthless deputy, took the lead. Gideon knelt by the village path, spotting Wovoka's footprints in the dust, a predatory grin spreading across his face. Walton shouted to the townsfolk, branding Wovoka a dangerous savage, his words stoking fear and hatred. The militia unleashed their dogs, their barks echoing across the desert, closing in on Wovoka's trail. A young Paiute boy, coerced by Walton's threats, stammered that Wovoka might head to the sacred lands. Walton dangled a reward for Wovoka's capture, his voice cold with greed. Gideon gripped his rifle, vowing to make Wovoka suffer for defying them. Word of the hunt reached Sarah in town, her heart sinking as she hid her fear, knowing Wovoka and Awee were running out of time. Wovoka found a shallow cave near the sacred lands, its cool shadows a brief respite from the desert's heat. He spread a blanket for Awee, piling dry grass to soften her rest, her shallow breaths worrying him. Awee traced a faint sketch on the cave wall, a trembling flower that spoke of her fading strength, and Wovoka's throat tightened at her effort to hold on. He counted their remaining food, a few strips of dried meat, his stomach twisting at how little they had. A faint rustle outside made him freeze, fearing the militia's dogs, his hand hovering over his knife. To soothe Awee, he told a tale of the sacred spring's healing waters, though doubt gnawed at him. Her quiet question, "Will I die here?" broke his heart, and he hugged her, vowing to find medicine, his resolve steeled by her fragile trust. As twilight draped the cave, a cloaked figure slipped into view, leaving a woven grass bundle at the entrance before vanishing. Wovoka crept forward, finding a cryptic pattern etched into the grass, his brow furrowing with curiosity. He suspected a Paiute ally, perhaps one who knew the militia's movements, but the figure's silence unsettled him. Awee, stirring from her fevered sleep, whispered she'd seen a similar figure by the spring, her words faint but urgent. Wovoka tucked the grass into his pouch, sensing it was a clue, his mind racing with possibilities. He sat by Awee, her fevered hand in his, and prayed to their ancestors for clarity, the bundle's mystery a spark of hope. The weight of their survival pressed harder, but the stranger's gesture kindled a fire in Wovoka's chest, urging him to unravel the truth behind the militia's cruelty. Wovoka turned the woven grass over in his hands, its strange pattern glinting in the cave's dim light, whispering secrets he couldn't yet grasp. He recalled Fulton's smug talk of unused land, a phrase that now felt like a threat to the Paiute's sacred grounds. His heart raced as he decided to sneak into Fulton's camp that night, hoping to uncover the truth behind the clue. He glanced at Awee, her fevered sleep restless, and whispered to her to stay hidden, his voice thick with worry. Wovoka slipped his knife into his belt and draped a basket over his shoulder, a flimsy disguise for the dangerous task ahead. Kneeling at the cave's entrance, he prayed to the spirits for courage, the desert's vast silence amplifying his fear. He crept through the moonless night, dodging cacti and rocks, his pulse pounding with each step toward Fulton's camp. As he moved, a flicker of hope battled his dread, the grass bundle urging him to fight for Awee and their people. Wovoka crouched behind a splintered fence at Fulton's camp, the glow of lanterns casting long shadows across the tents. His breath hitched as he spotted Fulton's main tent, its flap fluttering like a warning. Slipping through the darkness, he found a wooden crate reeking of something foul, his fingers brushing against a cold glass vial inside. Under Fulton's desk, he uncovered a stack of letters, one bearing the name Carter in bold ink, sending a chill down his spine. Wovoka stuffed the vial and a letter into his pouch, his hands shaking with the weight of what he'd found. A dog's sudden bark froze him, and he ducked behind a barrel, heart hammering as a guard's boots passed inches away. He darted back toward the fence, the stolen evidence burning against his chest. As he melted into the desert, Wovoka's mind raced with fear and triumph, knowing he'd uncovered something monstrous, but dreading the cost of being caught. Back in the cave, Wovoka hunched over the stolen letter, its words unveiling a sinister plot. Fulton and Carter planned to seize Paiute land by faking unused claims for a copper company. His blood boiled as he read of their scheme to poison the sacred spring with mine waste, a betrayal of the land's spirit. Awee stirred, her weak voice asking what he'd found, and Wovoka's throat tightened, unable to shield her from the truth. He examined the vial, its acrid stench confirming the letter's claims, his hands trembling with rage. The sacred spring, the heart of their stories, was being choked, and Wovoka felt a surge of defiance to stop it. He tucked the evidence under a rock, fearing militia searches, his mind spinning with how to expose the plot. Kneeling by Awee, he vowed to fight for their home, his heart heavy with the stakes. The cave's walls seemed to close in, urging him to act before it was too late. A twig snapped outside the camp as Wovoka fled, and Gideon's sharp voice cut through the night. "There's the thief!" Wovoka sprinted into the desert, his pouch bouncing with the stolen vial as Gideon's boots pounded behind him. A dropped basket snagged on a cactus, leaving a trail he couldn't erase, his stomach lurching with panic. Gideon fired a warning shot, the crack echoing like thunder, and Wovoka dove behind a boulder, clutching the evidence. His breath ragged, he peered out, seeing Gideon summon more men, their lanterns bobbing like predators' eyes. Wovoka scrambled through a dry wash, thorns tearing his skin, desperate to reach Awee. He reached the cave, collapsing beside her, his heart racing as he checked her fevered pulse. Whispering a prayer, Wovoka hid the vial deeper, fear clawing at him as the militia's distant shouts promised a relentless hunt. Wovoka sat by Awee, the cave's damp air heavy with his fear, and haltingly told her of Fulton's plan to poison their spring. Her eyes widened, a tear falling as she whispered, "The spring is our heart," her words slicing through him. He uncorked the vial, its bitter smell making him gag, and hid it with the letter behind a loose stone, his hands shaking with urgency. Awee urged him to tell the tribe, her voice frail but fierce, sparking a flicker of hope in Wovoka's chest. He checked their dwindling food, his stomach twisting at the thought of Awee starving. The distant bark of dogs sent a jolt through him, and he pulled Awee closer, promising to keep her safe. His mind churned with plans to reach Sarah, her kindness, his only bridge to help. As Awee clung to him, Wovoka's resolve hardened, the cave a fragile sanctuary against the storm closing in. Wovoka slipped into town at dusk, his heart pounding as he tapped on Sarah's window, her silhouette, a beacon in the dark. She gasped, pulling him inside, and listened as he spilled the truth about Fulton's plot, his voice low but urgent. Sarah's face paled, her hands twisting her apron as she admitted fear of her community's wrath if she helped. She agreed to hide the vial, her fingers brushing Wovoka's as she took it, a fleeting warmth amid their danger. Wovoka pleaded for her to contact a federal reporter, his eyes burning with desperation for Awee's sake. Sarah hesitated, her loyalty to her people warring with her love for him, her voice trembling as she promised to try. He left her cabin, the weight of her conflict heavy on his shoulders, his hope fragile as he vanished into the night, praying she'd choose to stand with him. Sarah's heart raced as she hid the vial in her pantry, its stench lingering like a curse. A knock at her door revealed Gideon, his eyes glinting with suspicion, accusing her of aiding that Paiute fugitive. She forced a calm smile, claiming ignorance, but Gideon's grip on her arm tightened, his threat to expose her chilling her blood. Sarah yanked free, slamming the door, her hands shaking as she leaned against it, fear coiling in her gut. She scribbled a warning note for Wovoka, her pen trembling, and hid it in her shawl, determined to reach him. Gideon's shadow lingered, minimize outside, his low chuckle promising trouble, and Sarah's resolve hardened. She prayed for Wovoka's safety, her heart torn between her town's rules and the man she loved. Slipping the note into her pocket, she vowed to protect the evidence, her courage a flickering flame against the growing darkness. Awee's fever spiked in the cave, her skin burning under Wovoka's touch, her whimpers cutting him deeper than any blade. He soaked a rag with their last drops of water, pressing it to her forehead, his hands trembling with helpless fear. He tried telling her a story of their ancestors' strength, but her glassy eyes barely flickered and his voice broke. Wovoka searched the cave for anything to ease her pain, finding only dust, his frustration choking him. Memories of Awee's collapse at the boarding school flooded back, each one a reminder of his failure to protect her. He whispered apologies, tears falling, as he held her frail hand, her silence louder than any cry. Wovoka decided to return to the village for help, his heart screaming against leaving her. He kissed her forehead, promising to bring medicine, his soul heavy with the dread of losing the only family he had left. Wovoka carried Awee back to the village, her weight light but crushing, her head draped in a shawl to hide her face. He sought Say at the council fire, dropping to his knees, his voice raw as he begged the elder to hear him. Villagers gathered, their whispers branding Wovoka a troublemaker, their eyes cold with doubt. He spoke of Fulton's plan to poison the spring, his words tumbling out, but Say demanded proof, his stern gaze unyielding. Awee's soft moan silenced the crowd, her pain a plea Wovoka couldn't ignore, fueling his desperation. He promised to retrieve the vial and letter, his chest tight with the tribe's mistrust. A young Paiute touched Awee's hand, offering a flicker of support, and Wovoka clung to it, vowing to return. Leading Awee to a hut, he felt the village's judgment, his hope fragile but unbroken, her trust his only anchor. Tsi stood before the fire, his voice like gravel, calling Wovoka a reckless fool who endangered the tribe. He argued that challenging Fulton would bring the militia's wrath, his words heavy with fear for their survival. Villagers nodded, their faces grim, accusing Wovoka of stirring chaos, their rejection stinging like a whip. Wovoka pleaded, describing the spring's slow death, his voice cracking as he spoke of Awee's suffering, but Say turned away unmoved. Awee's tears soaked Wovoka's sleeve, her quiet sobs igniting his anger, yet he held back, knowing rage would lose him everything. He swore to bring proof, his heart pounding with defiance, refusing to let the tribe's doubt break him. As he led Awee from the fire, the elder's silence echoed, a wall between Wovoka and his people. He gripped her hand, his resolve burning, determined to fight alone if he must, for her and the land they cherished. As Wovoka led Awee from the council fire, a shadow moved near the village edge, and the weaver of baskets stepped forward, his cloaked form silent as a spirit. He pressed a folded letter into Wovoka's hand, its wax seal marked with Fulton's crest, sparking a surge of hope in his chest. The letter detailed Fulton's meetings with Carter, confirming the land theft, and Wovoka's breath caught at the proof he'd prayed for. The weaver vanished into the night, his silence leaving Wovoka uneasy, wondering if this ally hid darker motives. Awee's faint smile, her first in days, warmed him as he whispered the news, her trust fueling his courage. He hid the letter in his pouch, his fingers trembling with the weight of its power. Kneeling by Awee in their borrowed hut, Wovoka prayed for strength, the weaver's gift a beacon in their darkening path. His heart pounded with resolve to use this evidence, determined to sway the tribe and save their sacred spring. Wovoka gathered the Paiute under the old oak at dawn, its branches a canopy of ancestral whispers, his voice steady as he began a tale of their people's fight for the land. He held up the weaver's letter, reading Fulton's plan to poison the spring, his words igniting gasps among the young. Elders frowned, their fear of the militia's guns heavy in their eyes. But Wovoka pressed on, his heart racing with urgency. Awee sat nearby, her trembling hand sketching the spring, her art a silent plea that softened a few skeptical faces. Wovoka promised to bring the vial as further proof, his voice firm despite the doubt he felt. A young warrior, eyes fierce, vowed to stand with him, sparking a ripple of nods. He ended with a prayer to their ancestors, his chest tight with hope and fear. The tribe agreed to hear him again, a fragile victory that left Wovoka clinging to Awee's quiet strength, determined to win their trust. The village buzzed with tension as the Paiute split into factions, young warriors shouting to confront Fulton while elders urged caution, their voices clashing like storm winds. Wovoka stood among them, his heart sinking as he heard accusations that he'd brought danger to their doors. He shared the story of his parents' death at militia hands, his voice breaking, hoping to stir their courage, and some eyes softened with shared grief. A woman pointed to the spring's dwindling flow, her words lending weight to Wovoka's warnings, yet fear held many back. Wovoka called for unity, his hands clenched, desperate to bridge the divide. Say remained silent, his weathered face unreadable, leaving Wovoka aching for his approval. A young girl offered Awee a woven bracelet, a small gesture that steadied Wovoka's resolve. He vowed to protect the spring, his hope flickering like a flame in the wind, knowing the tribe's doubt could doom them all. Sarah slipped into the village at twilight, her shawl hiding a vial of medicine for Awee, her eyes bright with worry as she found Wovoka. She pressed the bottle into his hands, whispering that it would ease Awee's fever, her touch a fleeting comfort in his storm of fear. Wovoka showed her the weaver's letter, and Sarah's face hardened, promising to copy it for a federal reporter she'd contacted. She admitted Gideon's threats haunted her voice trembling, but her resolve to help held firm. Wovoka's heart swelled with gratitude, though he feared for her safety, urging her to stay hidden. Sarah slipped a folded note into his hand, a warning about Gideon's patrols, her fingers lingering on his. As she left, Wovoka prayed for her courage, his chest tight with love and dread. He gave Awee the medicine, her faint sigh of relief anchoring his hope, pushing him to fight for their future. Hooves thundered near the village as Gideon's militia struck, their torches casting a hellish glow across the huts. Wovoka grabbed Awee, his heart pounding, and pulled her into the brush, her shallow breaths hot against his arm. A rifle shot cracked the air, splintering a nearby tree, and Wovoka's blood ran cold as screams erupted from the village. He shielded Awee, her trembling form sparking a fierce need to protect her, but her panicked cry betrayed their hiding spot. Wovoka bolted, dragging her through thorns, his mind racing to outrun Gideon's men. He doubled back through a dry gully, his lungs burning, praying the shadows would hide them. Awee collapsed, her fever sapping her strength, and Wovoka carried her, his arms aching but unyielding. As the militia's shouts faded, he found a cluster of rocks to hide in, his heart heavy with the village's suffering, vowing to make Gideon pay. In the rocky hideout, Wovoka cradled Awee, her fevered eyes urging him to act, and he resolved to call a tribal ceremony at the sacred lands to expose Fulton's plot. He envisioned the Paiute united, their voices rising to protect the spring, his heart swelling with fragile hope. Wovoka checked the weaver's letter, its words, his weapon, and tucked it safely in his pouch. Awee sketched a trembling image of the spring, her art a beacon for the ceremony, and Wovoka kissed her forehead, promising justice. He planned to rally the young warriors, their fire his only chance to sway the elders, his voice firm despite his fear. Kneeling in the dust, he prayed to the ancestors, the rocks around him echoing their ancient strength. The thought of Sarah's support steadied him, her courage a light in his darkening path. Wovoka vowed to make the ceremony a turning point, his resolve burning to save Awee and their land. Wovoka returned to the village, gathering the Paiute to prepare for the ceremony, his heart racing as he assigned tasks to the young warriors. He and Sarah pored over the letter, memorizing its damning words, her steady voice calming his nerves. Awee wove grass rings for the ritual, her frail hands shaking but determined, and Wovoka's throat tightened at her courage. Sarah brought more medicine, slipping it to Awee, her whispered encouragement a lifeline for them both. Young Paiute painted stones with symbols of the spring, their chatter filling Wovoka with hope, though elders' grim faces lingered. He rehearsed his speech, his voice echoing tales of their ancestors, each word a plea for unity. Wovoka checked the vial, its stench a grim reminder of their stakes, and hid it in a woven bag. As night fell, the village pulsed with purpose, and Wovoka prayed under the oak, his heart pounding with the weight of the coming fight. The sacred lands glowed with torchlight as the ceremony began, but Sheriff Walton's militia stormed in, their boots trampling the painted stones. Walton bellowed for the Paiute to disperse, his gun gleaming with threat, accusing Wovoka of rebellion. Wovoka stepped forward, his heart thundering, and faced Walton, his voice steady as he denounced Fulton's plot. The Paiute stood firm, their murmurs of defiance warming Wovoka's chest, though fear flickered in their eyes. Walton mocked Wovoka as a savage liar, his words cutting deep, but Wovoka held the letter high, its truth his shield. Awee clung to his side, her presence grounding him, her frail form a silent call to fight. Walton ordered his men to surround the gathering, their rifles clicking, and Wovoka's stomach twisted with dread. He urged the tribe to stand tall, his voice rising over the chaos, praying their courage would hold against the storm. Chaos erupted as Gideon charged through the ceremony, his fist slamming into Tse, who crumpled with a cry, blood trickling from his temple. Wovoka's rage flared, his hands itching to strike, but he rushed to Tse, cradling the elder as Awee sobbed beside him. The Paiute screamed, their voices a mix of fear and fury, as Gideon laughed, his cruelty fueling Wovoka's hate. Wovoka tore his shirt to bandage Tse's wound, his fingers shaking with guilt for bringing this violence. Awee's tears fell on Tse's hand, her grief a mirror of Wovoka's, and he whispered apologies, vowing to protect them. Walton called off his men, their retreat a hollow victory, but the Paiute's anger surged, some now chanting Wovoka's name. Tse's shallow breaths steadied Wovoka's resolve, his heart burning to expose Fulton. As the crowd rallied, Wovoka felt a shift, the tribe's trust flickering to life amid the blood and chaos. Walton's voice roared over the ceremony, ordering the vial's destruction, and Gideon snatched it from Wovoka's bag, hurling it into a fire. The letter followed, its pages curling to ash as Wovoka lunged forward, his heart shattering with each flame. Militia pinned him back, their grips bruising, and Wovoka's screams echoed his despair, the proof of Fulton's crime vanishing. Awee crawled to his side, her frail voice insisting she believed him, her trust a lifeline in his breaking world. Young warriors shouted defiance, their fists raised, refusing to let the fire kill their hope. Wovoka's eyes stung with tears, his dream of justice crumbling, yet Awee's hand in his sparked a stubborn resolve. He prayed to the ancestors, begging for another way, his chest heaving with loss. As the flames died, Wovoka vowed to find new proof, his heart clinging to the tribe's growing faith, determined to honor Awee's courage. Wovoka slumped beside Awee in the fading torchlight, the ashes of the burned letter a bitter reminder of his failure, his heart heavy as stone. Awee's frail hand squeezed his, her whispered, "You're enough," piercing his despair, her trust a fragile thread holding him together. He shared a story of their ancestors rebuilding after loss, his voice cracking, hoping to kindle hope in her fevered eyes. Tears fell as he admitted his fear of losing her, the cave's shadows mirroring his crumbling resolve. Wovoka recalled his mother's words, "Truth finds a way," and clung to them, refusing to surrender. He vowed to find new evidence, his chest tight with determination, Awee's courage his anchor. She sketched a faint warrior on a stone, her trembling fingers gifting him strength, and Wovoka kissed her forehead, promising to fight on. Kneeling in the dust, he prayed for a miracle, the weight of their survival crushing but not breaking him, his love for Awee, a fire that refused to die. Sarah hurried through the town's dark alleys, the copied letter hidden in her shawl, her heart racing with fear of Gideon's patrols. A rough hand grabbed her, and Gideon's sneer loomed, accusing her of treason for aiding Wovoka. He dragged her to Fulton's camp, tying her wrists, his threats to kill her if Wovoka didn't surrender chilling her blood. Sarah bit her lip, refusing to betray Wovoka, her silence a shield for the man she loved. Gideon struck her cheek, the pain sharp but fueling her defiance, her eyes burning with resolve. She caught Mrs. Fulton's guilty glance, the woman's silence, a betrayal, and Sarah's hope flickered. Locked in a storage shed, she scratched a message for Wovoka on a scrap of cloth, her hands trembling with urgency. Praying he'd find her, Sarah curled up in the dark, her courage a small flame against the cold, her heart tethered to Wovoka and Awee. Wovoka hid in the desert scrub, Awee's fevered form curled beside him, when the weaver of baskets appeared, his cloaked figure a ghost in the moonlight. He led Wovoka to a hidden cache under a rock, revealing more of Fulton's letters, their words a lifeline to justice. Wovoka's heart leaped, the papers detailing Carter's payments, his hands shaking with renewed hope. The weaver whispered he'd once worked for Carter, his voice low with regret, and Wovoka's trust wavered, sensing hidden motives. He tucked the letters into his pouch, vowing to use them, his mind racing with plans. The weaver, warned of Gideon's hunt, urging haste, then vanished, leaving Wovoka uneasy but determined. Kneeling by Awee, Wovoka prayed for guidance, the letters a heavy promise in his hands. Her faint murmur of "keep going" steeled his resolve, pushing him to seek a reporter, his heart burning to end Fulton's reign. Wovoka slipped through the desert to meet the weaver's contact, a federal reporter camping near the sacred lands, his heart pounding with hope and fear. He handed over the new letters, explaining Fulton's plot in a hushed voice, his eyes pleading for action. The reporter, a grizzled man named Hayes, nodded, promising to investigate, his calm words a balm to Wovoka's frayed nerves. Wovoka wrote a note detailing the spring's poisoning, his hands steady despite Awee's worsening fever. Back at their hideout, he checked her pulse, her weak breaths tearing at his soul, and whispered promises of victory. Awee's faint sketch of a bird drawn in the dirt sparked a flicker of joy in his chest, her spirit unbroken. Wovoka prayed the reporter would act swiftly, his hope fragile as he held Awee close. The desert silence pressed in, but the letter's weight in Hayes' hands fueled Wovoka's determination to save his sister and their land. Word of the letters reached Carter, and his men descended on the cache, torches blazing as they burned the remaining papers to ash. Wovoka watched from a ridge, his heart sinking, but Hayes sent a runner, confirming he'd saved copies, rekindling Wovoka's hope. Carter's militia scoured the desert, their dogs baying, and Wovoka tightened his grip on Awee, her fever spiking again. He moved her to a new hideout, a shallow cave, his arms aching but unyielding, fear gnawing at him. Awee's delirious murmurs of their parents broke his heart, and he soothed her with a story of the spring's eternal flow. Wovoka prayed for Hayes to act before Carter struck the village, his chest tight with dread. A young Paiute scout brought news of the tribe's growing support, their chants for Wovoka a faint light in the dark. He vowed to confront Carter, his resolve hardened by Awee's fragile trust, the desert's heat no match for his burning will. Wovoka gathered his strength in the cave, Awee's shallow breaths urging him to act, and he planned a bold protest at the town hall to expose Fulton publicly. He envisioned the Paiute and townsfolk united, their voices drowning out Carter's lies, his heart swelling with fragile hope. Wovoka rehearsed a speech, weaving tales of the spring's sacred power, his voice steady despite his fear. He sent a message to Sarah through a Paiute runner, praying she'd escaped, his love for her a quiet strength. Young warriors crafted banners from woven grass, their fierce eyes mirroring Wovoka's resolve, and he felt the tribe's spirit rising. Kneeling by Awee, he prayed under the cave's low ceiling, the ancestors' presence grounding him. Her faint whisper, "Save our home," ignited his purpose, and he vowed to make the protest a beacon of truth. Wovoka's heart raced with the stakes, determined to rally all who'd listen for Awee and the spring. Mrs. Fulton, guilt-ridden, freed Sarah from the shed, her whispered apology barely easing Sarah's fear as she fled to the village. She found Wovoka in a hidden hut, her eyes brimming with relief, and recounted her capture, her voice shaking but fierce. Wovoka shared his protest plan, and Sarah agreed to join, her heart set on justice despite the risk, her hand brushing his in silent promise. She brought a final vial of medicine for Awee, slipping it into Wovoka's hands, her care for his sister deepening his love. They practiced the speech together, her steady voice calming his nerves, their shared goal a bond against the world. Sarah wrote a letter to Hayes, urging haste, her pen firm despite her trembling fingers. As she left to gather townsfolk, Wovoka prayed for her safety, his chest tight with hope and dread. Awee's faint smile as the medicine took effect fueled his resolve, pushing him toward the fight ahead. Awee's strength faded in the hut, her voice gone, her trembling hand sketching a final bird on a stone, its wings a silent cry for freedom. Wovoka fed her sips of water, his hands shaking as he wiped her burning brow, his heart breaking with each labored breath. He told her of their parents' love, his voice soft, hoping she heard, her glassy eyes fixed on him. Awee's weak grip on his hand, her fingers cold, tore at his soul, and he whispered promises of a healed spring. Memories of her laughter, before the boarding school, flooded back, each one a wound, and Wovoka's tears fell freely. He prayed to the ancestors, begging them to hold her, his voice choking with fear of losing her. Wovoka resolved to carry her to the protest, her presence, his strength, refusing to let her fade alone. He kissed her forehead, his love, a fierce vow to fight for her, even as death's shadow loomed. Wovoka led the Paiute to the town hall, Awee cradled in his arms, her weight a sacred burden as banners of woven grass rose high. He stood on the steps, his voice booming with tales of the spring's lifeblood, the crowd of Paiute and townsfolk growing hushed. Young warriors held Awee's painted stones, their colors a cry for justice, and Wovoka's heart swelled with their support. He read from a copied letter, Fulton's plot laid bare, gasps rippling through the onlookers, some whites nodding in shock. Sarah stood beside him, her presence steadying his nerves, her eyes fierce with shared purpose. Gideon's men circled, their glares menacing, but Wovoka's words held the crowd, his voice a beacon in the chaos. A townsman shouted agreement, sparking cheers, and Wovoka's hope soared, though Awee's weakening pulse urged him to hurry. He called for the spring's salvation, his heart pounding, determined to make this moment their victory. The weaver of baskets stepped onto the town hall steps, his cloak falling to reveal a scarred Paiute face, his voice steady as he declared himself a former Carter worker. He presented a witness, a trembling miner who confessed to dumping waste in the spring, his words silencing the crowd. Wovoka's heart leaped, the weaver's truth a blade against Fulton's lies, his gratitude unspoken but deep. The crowd turned on Fulton's men, their shouts of outrage drowning Gideon's threats, and Wovoka felt the tide shift. He held Awee tighter, her faint breath urging him on, and spoke of her courage, his voice breaking with love. Hayes, the reporter, scribbled furiously, promising to publish the truth, his nod a spark of hope. The weaver met Wovoka's eyes, a silent vow of alliance, and the Paiute cheered, their unity a wall against Carter's greed. Wovoka prayed this would save the spring, his heart soaring yet heavy with Awee's fading life, determined to honor her fight. The miner's confession echoed through the town hall, each word a hammer shattering Fulton's facade, and the crowd's roar of outrage drowned out his stammered denials. Wovoka stood tall, Awee limp in his arms, his voice rising as he recounted her suffering, her painted stones a testament to her fight. Townsfolk pointed at Fulton's men, their shouts demanding justice, and Wovoka's heart surged with the tide turning. Sarah gripped his arm, her eyes blazing with pride, her presence a steady anchor in the chaos. Hayes scribbled every detail, his pen racing to capture the truth, promising a story that would reach the capital. A woman from town tossed a stone at Fulton's feet, her curse a spark that ignited more jeers, and Wovoka felt the weight of victory. He prayed for Awee to feel this moment, her faint pulse urging him to finish the fight. As Fulton shrank under the crowd's scorn, Wovoka's resolve burned, knowing this was the justice he'd vowed to win. Sheriff Walton shoved through the crowd, his badge tarnished by the miner's words, but Hayes stepped forward, flanked by federal marshals, their handcuffs glinting. Walton's face paled as he confessed his role in Fulton's scheme, his voice trembling, and Wovoka's chest swelled with grim satisfaction. The marshals seized Walton, his militia scattering like leaves in a storm, their loyalty crumbling. Wovoka held up a copied letter, its words sealing Walton's fate, and handed it to Hayes, his hands steady despite Awee's weakening grip. The Paiute cheered, their voices a thunder of unity, and young warriors embraced, their hope reborn. Wovoka whispered to Awee, praying she heard the victory, her shallow breaths a knife in his heart. Hayes vowed to shut down Carter's operation, his nod a promise of justice, and Wovoka's eyes stung with relief. The town hall pulsed with triumph, and Wovoka stood firm, his sister's courage the fire that had brought them here. As the crowd's cheers faded, Awee's breath stilled in Wovoka's arms, her final sigh a quiet release that broke his heart. He sank to the town hall steps, cradling her, tears streaming as he whispered her name, the world blurring around him. Her painted stone, clutched in her hand, showed a bird soaring, its wings her last gift, and Wovoka's sobs shook his frame. He carried her to the old oak, laying her beneath its branches, the tree's shadow a sacred embrace. The Paiute gathered, their soft chants honoring her spirit, and Wovoka spoke of her bravery, his voice raw with love. Sarah knelt beside him, her tears mingling with his, her hand warm on his shoulder. He placed Awee's stones by the spring, their colors a promise to remember her. Wovoka prayed her soul flew free, his grief a heavy cloak, yet her sacrifice fueled his vow to protect their land. Awee's death wove the Paiute together, their shared grief a bond, stronger than fear, and they gathered at the spring to mourn her. Tse, his head bandaged, clasped Wovoka's shoulder, his apology soft but sincere, naming him a true leader. Young warriors vowed to guard the spring, their fists raised in her honor, and Wovoka's heart swelled with their trust. He led a ceremony, his voice steady as he told Awee's story, her courage a light for the tribe. Women painted new stones, their designs echoing Awee's, ensuring her spirit lived on. Elders nodded, their doubt replaced by pride, and Wovoka felt their unity heal his wounds. Sarah stood among them, her presence welcomed, her quiet strength a bridge between worlds. Wovoka prayed under the oak, Awee's memory a fire in his chest, driving him to lead with her bravery, the tribe's resolve a wall against future threats. Sarah chose Wovoka over her town's judgment, standing by his side at the spring, her hand in his a defiance of hate. The Paiute embraced her, their smiles warm, naming her a sister for her courage, and Wovoka's heart soared with love. He spoke of a future where their children could thrive, his voice soft but firm, and Sarah's eyes shone with shared dreams. She taught Paiute children to read, her laughter blending with theirs, and Wovoka felt Awee's spirit in their joy. They prayed together under the oak, their whispered vows a promise to honor the land. Sarah's strength steadied Wovoka's grief, her touch a reminder of hope, and he thanked the ancestors for her. The tribe's trust in their bond grew, their unity a shield against prejudice. Wovoka looked to the horizon, his heart lighter, knowing Sarah's love would carry him through the pain of loss. Fulton faced a federal court, his empire crumbling as marshals led him away, his pleas drowned by the crowd's jeers. Carter's mind shut down, his wealth stripped by Hayes's expose, and Wovoka read the news under the oak, his chest tight with justice. The spring flowed clear again, its waters a testament to their fight, and Paiute children splashed in its shallows, their laughter a victory. Townsfolk apologized, some offering food to the tribe, and Wovoka accepted with cautious hope, Awee's memory guiding him. Fulton's sentence was long, Carter's name ruined, and Wovoka felt the land breathe easier. Hayes' article spread far, naming Awee a hero, and Wovoka's eyes stung with pride. The Paiutes sang of their triumph, their voices rising to the stars. Wovoka prayed for peace, his heart steady, knowing their fight had saved their home and honored Awee's sacrifice. The weaver of baskets slipped away after the protest. His absence, a quiet mystery. But he left a perfect basket by the spring, its weave tight as a promise. Wovoka found it at dawn, its patterns echoing Awee's stones, and his throat tightened with gratitude. The Paiute, named the basket a symbol of hope, their voices soft with reverence, and Wovoka placed it on a rock, its presence sacred. He told the tribe of the weaver's aid, his story weaving the stranger into their lore, his heart warm with respect. Children touched the basket, their eyes wide, and Wovoka felt the weaver's spirit linger. He prayed for the man's safety, his hands tracing the weave, hoping he'd found peace. The tribe vowed to honor his gift, their unity stronger for it. Wovoka stood by the spring, his heart full, knowing the weaver's quiet courage had helped save them. Wovoka sat under the old oak. Children gathered close, their eyes bright as he spun tales of Awee's courage and the spring's salvation. His voice carried the rhythm of Paiute songs, each word a thread tying them to their past, his heart warm with purpose. Young warriors listened, their resolve growing, and Wovoka saw Awee's spirit in their fire. He taught them to weave baskets, his hands guiding theirs, the craft a link to their ancestors. Elders nodded, their pride a balm to his grief, and Wovoka felt the tribe's strength rise. Sarah sat nearby, her smile soft, her presence a quiet strength. He told of the weaver's mystery, the children gasping, and Wovoka prayed Awee heard their joy. The oak's shade held them close, its roots a promise of endurance, and Wovoka's stories wove a future where their culture thrived, his love for Awee eternal. Wovoka and Sarah built a small lodge by the spring, its walls hung with Awee's painted stones, a sanctuary for Paiute stories. Children ran through, their laughter echoing, and Wovoka's heart lifted, seeing Awee's legacy live. The tribe invited townsfolk to visit, their shared meals a step toward peace, and Wovoka spoke of unity, his voice firm. Sarah wrote a book of Paiute tales, her pen steady, and Wovoka read it to the children, his pride in her boundless. They held a yearly festival, the spring adorned with woven rings, and the Paiute danced, their steps a celebration of survival. Elders taught basketry, their hands steady, and Wovoka felt the tribe's roots deepen. He prayed under the oak, thanking the ancestors, his grief softer now. Wovoka and Sarah dreamed of a school for all children, their love a bridge across divides, Awee's spirit guiding their every step. The Paiute lands stood free, the spring's clear waters a mirror of their triumph, and Wovoka walked its banks, his heart full of Awee's memory. Named the tribe's leader, he spoke with wisdom, his voice echoing her courage. The Paiutes trust a crown he wore lightly. Sarah and Wovoka's lodge became a haven, its walls alive with stories, their love a beacon for unity. Fulton and Carter languished in prison, their plot exposed by Hayes' words, and the spring flowed untainted, a gift to the future. Awee's sacrifice burned in Wovoka's soul, her stones a reminder to fight on, her spirit in every ripple. The Paiute thrived, their songs rising to the stars, their culture unbroken. Wovoka told Awee's tale under the oak, his tears mingling with pride, her legacy eternal. Love and courage had conquered hate. But Wovoka knew the cost, his heart forever tied to Awee's light.